Hey, welcome back. All right, our second video here, we're going to talk about relationships. So if you watched the last video, we talked about the data date. So if you missed that, go back and check out the data date explained. And then if you noticed, I did not have relationships in there as a key foundational concept, and I was going to jump right to the early and late dates, and then I realized, man, you really can't explain those without relationships. So let's start with relationships and talk about that briefly. And then in the next video, I think it'll be time to move on to the early and late dates. So relationships, there's only four types of relationships. I'm going to copy this text box down, and I'll just put this over here. The four types of relationships we have finish to start, which is probably the most common. We have a start to start. We have a start to finish, which is I have a hard time conceptualizing it, but it's very uncommon to be used in the scheduling world. You don't see it much, but sometimes it does happen. And then you also have a finish to finish. So those are the four relationship types. We'll say relationship types that you'll see in scheduling. So let's talk about each of these four and what that means. So in the last video, we talked about the data date. So right now, I'm going to call this our baseline schedule, and it's going to have a data date of August 1st, 2022. And everything to the left of the data date is progress achieved. Everything to the right is forecasted work. And so if we were going to create a few activities here, let's create some activities, and we want to sequence them. Each rectangle represents an activity, and we want to sequence them in a way where one comes after the other. So here we'll call this activity 1. We'll call this one activity 2, and we'll call this one activity 3. All right. So a finish to start relationship simply means that activity 1, we need that to finish before activity 2 can begin, and activity 2 has to finish before activity 3 can start. Finish to start. So it's in the obviously in the title of the name. So I'm going to say activity 1 has to finish before activity 2 can start, and then activity 2 has to finish before activity 3 can start. And that's what that sequence is going to look like. Those activities are now tied together with finish to start relationships. Now, if we talk about start to start relationship, that simply means that the predecessor, the predecessor is simply the activity before the next one. So there's predecessors and successors. So activity 1 is a predecessor to activity 2, and it's tied together right now using a finish to start relationship. Activity 1 is a predecessor to activity 2. Okay, so if we change this to a start to start, so we say activity 1 is a start to start relationship with activity 2, you can guess what that means. It's simply that these are now going to shift forward here, and we're saying activity 1 has to start. Man, that is represented terribly. Let me kind of move that off the data date so you can see it better. So activity 1, once that starts, then activity 2 can also start. So it's no longer being driven by the finish date of activity 1. You simply say the predecessor to activity 2 is activity 1, and once activity 1 starts, then that is what drives the start of activity 2. All right? That's a start to start relationship. If we said, if we wanted to change the relationship between 2 and 3 and say, let's do a start to start instead, well, then activity 3 would simply slide in like this, and then that could start at the same time as activity 2. So now all of these have start to start relationships with one another. If we were to do a start to finish relationship, this is the one that to me it's just so strange. Like I see it very I really never see it much in the scheduling world, and when I do come across it, I kind of ask questions about what are you trying to show. So what that means is let's do it between activity 2 and 3. So activity 2 has to start before activity 3 can finish. So what that looks like is activity 3 now moves forward, and the start of activity 2 is now the predecessor to the finish of activity 3. Now, if you're having trouble conceptualizing that, you're not alone. I've been doing this a long time, and I still have a hard time conceptualizing that, and I don't see it used very often. Finish to start is so common. You think about something like building a wall, like a house wall. You get your framing in. You have to get your framing in before you can put your drywall over the top of it. That's easy to visualize. Even a start to start, that's easy to visualize. Okay, I'm doing my wall. I started framing my wall, and before the wall finishes, I'm gonna start my drywaller because there's enough of the wall that's done, and I can now start my drywaller. I can conceptualize that. Start to finish, it's a tough one. I don't have a great way of describing that. Maybe one of you does. Leave a comment below if you have a way of describing start to finish relationships. Finish to finish relationships. Simply, if we want to do that between activity 2 and 3, we simply say that the finish of activity 2 is going to drive the finish of activity 3. So kind of in our wall drywall instance, we say, all right, the wall has to be finished before drywall can be finished. And those can finish at the same time under a finish to finish relationship. So those are the 4 types of relationships that we have. And then if you wanted to expand on that, you would add lags in there. So you'll see, in the scheduling programs, you're going to have relationships, and you're also going to have lags. And a lag is simply the separation of a relationship by a duration. What I mean by that is, let's go back to our finish to start relationship here. All right, so we're going to go activity 1 to activity 2, and then activity 2 we'll say is going to be a finish to start relationship with activity 3. So if I add, let's do a finish to start relationship, and I'm going to do plus 3 days of lag. All right, what that means is that activity 2 can't start for a duration of 3 days after the finish of activity 1. So let me draw like a little arrow here just so you can see. So this arrow here that kind of represents the relationship between, or I guess the pause of when activity 2 can start, that is now 3 days. 3 days. Getting a little, let's make sure that we have that there. All right. So finish to start with 3 days of lag. Activity 1 finishes, and then there's a gap, and then 3 days later, activity 2 can start. So same thing with start to start. You can do start to start plus, 5 days of lag. That just simply means that our start date is going to be pushed out by 5 days when you compare it to the start of activity 1. So activity 1 is going to start, and then activity 2 can't start until 5 days later after the start of activity 1. And the reason that you use lags is kind of like when we go back to our wall example. You start framing your wall. You don't immediately want to start the drywaller. You want to give some space to allow the framer to make some progress, and then you can start your drywall or your rough-in work. So they're not going to start immediately upon each other, because then you're going to have kind of crew issues overlapping and getting in the way with one another. You want them to get some headway and make some progress before you start the next trade. There's also negative lags, which just work in reverse. So, you know, if you had like a negative 5 days of lag, simply what that means is that activity 2 would start 5 days before the start of activity 1, which is a little confusing, but just know that you can do negative lags and positive lags, and each one of these relationships you can put lags on. You know, by default, it's going to be 0 days of lag, and then if you want overlap or things like that, then you use the lags to add in and take away. So I hope that makes sense. 4 types of relationships, and then you can have positive and negative lags. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave a comment below. I'll see you in the next video, and hopefully I don't think of anything else, and we'll talk about early, late, and actual dates. Okay, see you there.